Pockets from ECW, this pocket-sized, beautiful book. Pockets it's full of wonder, and it's certainly will trigger your own surrealist memories and associations from your own childhood. Let's have Stuart kick you off through those.
Hi there, thanks so much. I'm going to do a million thanks to start with. And Suzanne, thank you for hosting. You're amazing. Thank you so much. And Francis and Trevor, that was a spectacular and sublime and ethereal set of music. And I'm so grateful for that. And I feel like I'm at the Academy Awards here. And also, Julia and Patricia and the Junction City Music Hall, this is a great place. Thank you for having us here. Although, thank you so much for live streaming this event, so people in Trondheim can watch this at 4 in the morning right now. I also want to thank Steve for, I had to beg and beg and beg him to launch with me, then he finally agreed, Steve Venright, that's so nice. And Jack and Sarah and Michael and everyone else at ECW Press for publishing such a weird-ass little book. I'm so grateful to them for supporting me all these years. And just in case Brian and Karen at Anvil are watching this live stream, I figure I should thank them too also for giving me the Feed Dog imprint. And most of all, thank all of the people from so many facets of my life and manner in the north end of Toronto. And because this book is so short, if I were to devote the entire time to reading from it, my 20 minutes, you would hear it 3 times. So I thought I'd pad it out with some tedious stuff from previous books that also take place in Bathurst Manor. So this is a poem of mine called My Mother Had a Store in Our Basement. My mother had a store in our basement. Our basement had black and white tiles. I threw a fork at my brother Owen, who stood at the top of the stairs. I missed but splintered the door a bit, and all the Jewish women in Bathurst Manor came down to my mother's store and bought vases, dry flowers, and frames. In a room beyond the store was my father's workshop, nails, a vise, hacksaws, levels, and wrenches, rolls of brown paper and hunks of styrofoam. And it smelled down there of grease and spiders, of heat from the cobweb-draped furnace. The furnace had a small window at one end. I stared into the flames. I took my friends down through my mother's store, and together we stared into the flames. Up 3 floors, I shared a bedroom with Owen. I lay in bed and thought of the furnace below. While I lay there sleeping, a fire was roaring in the room beside my mother's store. The lawn was covered in snow. Ice hung from the telephone wires. My grandfather's teeth sat on the edge of his sink, dictating poems to the night. And that was from my book, A Sparrow Came Down Resplendent, which is from Woolsack and Wynne, and was edited by my dear friend Paul, who's here tonight. Thanks. I'm going to read the first chapter of my first novel, which was also, was it? Yeah, it was also published by ECW Press. And it's called Snowball Dragonfly Jew, and it also takes place in Bathurst Manor. And I think we're probably all in the mood right now to hear about the assassination of a white supremacist. So, and the deal with this book, which I didn't really mention much before, was that shortly before my mother died, she told me she had been making plans to assassinate Ernst Zundel, for real, Ernst Zundel, the neo-Nazi. And she was out, like, looking at guns and figuring out what kind of guns she could. My mother, she was an Jewish interior decorator woman from Bathurst Manor. But she said it was true, and I asked some friends of hers, and one friend of hers confirmed that. The other ones didn't know about it. So in this book, my mother assassinates a guy very much like Ernst Zundel 6 times. This is the first chapter. It's called The Dream. To its surprise, the bullet sailed out of the gun my mother clutched unsteadily in both hands, and a moment later the big man's yellow hard hat leapt from his thick head into the air. When the hard hat had reached the exact height of the roof of the hardware store, it stopped. Its dull curve had been ruptured by a singed bullet hole just an inch from a jagged black insignia. It remained suspended far above our heads and above the body of the big man who had slammed heavily to the sidewalk like a piano falling 10 floors. We gazed up at the hard hat, then down at the man, then back up at the hard hat. From behind the plate glass window of the hardware store, a stubby guy with a withered left arm and bushy black eyebrows gazed with us. A pencil poked out from behind his ear. I wondered if he was the same guy with a pencil behind his ear from when I was a kid. My mother slowly lowered her hands, chewing on her bottom lip as if she were thinking really hard. Then she carefully placed the gun in the paper Dominion grocery bag by her feet, among the cartons of milk, the bananas, the celery, the cornflakes, the little boxes of powdered Jell-O, the packet of dry farfel, the length of Chicago 59 salami, and the kosher steaks wrapped in leaking brown paper. We had Worcestershire sauce in the fridge at home. I glanced at my big brother, Jake. He was squinting quietly in thought. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder. More people, some of them our neighbors, began to emerge from the shops to see what had happened. Toots Rosen, Marky Adler, Frida Laba, the father from the Neskis, Wallace was it, or Walter? They stepped out of the shoe store, the cigar store, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, and the bank. They stepped out of the Red Ruby Chinese restaurant. Across the street in the park with the slides, the teeter-totter, and the incredible rocket ship monkey bars, a few kids had run right up to the frost fence. Their noses poked through. Their hands were like claws on the crisscrossed metal. On the sidewalk, the man neither spoke nor twitched. The shadow of a breeze rippled his thinning hair. His eyes were gently shut, a trickle of black blood leaking neatly from his blue temple. He lay motionless there in front of the hardware store in Bathurst Manor Plaza, dreaming of a white, white world. So this was this little tiny book called Pockets, and just a little bit of background is there was a book published in 1972 by an amazing avant-garde experimental press called Something Else Press, and this book was by Toby McLennan, and it was called One Walked Out of Two and Forgot It, and I read it a few years later, around 1975, and I read it again and again, many times when I was a teenager, and it blew me away, and I read it again about a year and a half ago, and I thought, this book was so important to me. I really wanted to publish something, write something that was sort of an homage to Toby McLennan and her book, One Walked Out of Two and Forgot It. And one of the interesting things about the book, there's so many interesting things about every page of Toby's book, but is that I don't know how much you can see it here, but the text all rests on the bottom of the page. It didn't even occur to me, it's sort of like stuff that's fallen to the bottom of a pocket. So, and I've been getting notes from various people, and one person referred to each chapter, because each page is sort of a chapter, as pockets. Oh, I really like that pocket on page 39. And then someone knew I don't like the word novella, and she suggested this, a friend of mine, Claire Dion, and she suggested that this either be called what did she say? It was a novel and a poem. Oh, because it's poetry, a povel. She said I should call it a povel, or maybe what would the other thing be? A gnome? A novum. That was it. Anyway, it's very fascinating. So who cares? The interesting thing about this book is in the front there's a little thing that says, "This is a work of fiction. Name, characters, places, and incidents either are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, business establishments, events, or locales is entirely coincidental." And I especially want my friends Steve and Ken to know that. Shore, or the one that rolls into the sea. And the second epigraph is by a really dear friend of mine, John Lavery, a great novelist, died 2010. Great novels, great short story writer. In fact, his first 2 books of short stories were published by UCW Press. And his last book, Sandra Beck, was edited by Melanie Little. She was at House of Anansi. And this is just a very short couple of sentences from his book, Sandra Beck. No, I was not alone. I looked out my bedroom window and saw my brother floating over the weeping willows. His feet fluttered as if he were wearing flippers. His arms trailed at his sides, his fingertips pointing back to where he had just come from. Where he had just come from now looked like a hovering oil slick, glittering with traces of the moon's pale light. I reached into the bottom of my pants pockets, grasped the seams, and pulled the pockets out till they looked like dog ears flopping against my thighs. They were empty. I counted to 18 and stuffed them back into my pants. Then I scooped up palmfuls of my own shadow from the floor and filled my pockets with them. The door to my parents' bedroom was shut. Gently, I pushed it open and peeked in. The television threw a glow onto their bed. They lay side by side, my mother and father, completely still. I heard the voice of Deborah Kerr in The Innocents. It was, therefore, sometime after 1961. I slipped out of the house, into my car, and drove to the cemetery. I reached into my pockets, took out some small rocks, and placed them on the headstone my parents shared. I peered through my living room window at the house across the street and into their living room window. I could see my friend Stevie. He reached down and pulled out his pants pockets. Coins fell out and raisins, a baseball glove and a twisted menorah. Newts scampered down his legs and goldfish drifted into the air as if the living room were filled with water. Stevie pushed his pockets back into his pants, wiped the back of one hand across his nostrils, and disappeared from my view. Soon his front door opened. He appeared on the porch. Then he was on the roof. Then he stepped out of his open garage. He walked away down our street, down Panhill Road. The street rolled up after him, revealing a dark ravine beneath. Back on Earth, some people didn't have houses. Meanwhile, some houses didn't have people. My mother. Her lips touched my forehead. She walked out the front door. A winter draft swept across the floor toward me and bowled me over. I heard her start her car. My grandfather's voice from downstairs. He called her name. I drifted along the hardwood floor. He called her name again. On the television, a president got shot in the head. In our basement was an old fridge. The noise it made was louder than the stuttering hum of the new fridge upstairs in our kitchen. It was white with a silver handle. It contained a turkey. The turkey had presented itself to my father as a reward for my father's success in bowling. My father took 3 or 4 long strides. The ball left his hands. The sound of the ball rolling down the lane is the sound of me not remembering what that sound sounded like. The girl next door had never heard of the Beatles. I laughed. She laughed too. Her name was Karen. She showed me her Cowsills comic book, and her mother gave us peanut butter sandwiches and milk in glasses that had once held Yorkshire candles. I looked out their kitchen window and saw my own house. My grandfather was standing on the roof beside his treadle-operated sewing machine. He was born in Poland, and he clenched a piece of thread between his teeth. When I woke up, I was surprised to find myself swimming through the air, my skin cool and damp from a light drizzle. Beneath me was an enormous weeping willow. I passed the window of a house where a small lamp threw light on the face of a boy lying in his bed, looking across the room and out the window. Just before he left my field of vision, I recognized the boy as me, peering out the window at his brother drifting by. Marky did not like the books about the boy detectives. Look, this is a good one, I said. This is a good one. Too, I like this one. There were thousands of them, and they were all good. You got to know everybody. Frank and Joe Hardy, Chet Morton, Fenton Hardy, and Gertrude, Iola Morton, and Biff Hooper. Also Phil Cohen. I looked at the page in disbelief. There was a Phil Cohen. Stevie was on his lawn, cutting grass with hedge clippers. Look, he said, I'm cutting the grass. I reached in to help clear away some of the cut grass. The tip of my right index finger got snipped off. Stevie ran away. In the hospital, they put a rubber thing that looked like a nipple over my finger. My parents had to apply mercurochrome 4 times a day. It stained my finger red. I refused to go to school with a nipple finger. I told Marky about a book I was reading. It was the story of a SEAL named Oscar who battled Nazi U-boats. In both our cases, Marky's and mine, Nazis killed lots of members of our families, but before we were ever born. Some SEALs balanced beach balls on their noses, and some took on the Nazis. I'm going to read a couple more pockets here, but the one person I forgot to thank, which I'm one of the things that thrills me about this book is this cover, and it's a beautiful, beautiful hand-drawn cover done by a friend of mine named Katrina Longmire. It was in Vancouver, and we've been really wanting to collaborate for a long time. And she did this cover, and the fine folks at ECW Press were very accommodating and letting this be the cover of the book. And by coincidence, she also designed the logo for the Feed Dog imprint, a Feed Dog book. So I'm going to read just 2 more of these, and I'm going to thank you again all so much for being here. It means an awful lot to me that you're here. It's so great to see you. The name of the road my house was on was Pannyhill Road. Nobody was named Pannyhill. There isn't a country called Pannyhill. A pannyhill is not a thing. In the synagogue, after Saturday morning service, all of the old men went to the adjoining room where they held chickpeas on paper napkins in the palms of their hands. The women sipped tea from foam cups. We, the children, prayed that it would all soon be over. My friend Kenny's Uncle Norm shook everybody's hands. When I became old, I would eat chickpeas. Thanks a lot.
Minutes, and we'll grab Steve. Label. He's overseen the archive of legendary sleep talker Dion McGregor. He's released albums by the singer and composer Samuel Andreev. He's collaborated with Coach House Books to release audio work by people like Christian Book and Christopher Dudney. In other words, Steve is never one-dimensional. He's always ever expanding, and of course, always magnificent. I'm going to bring Alex Porco up, who compiled the work in this beautiful new book and wrote the afterword, just so we can sort of contextualize the work and bring Steve up. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will be brief up here. I'm slightly nervous, but I will do my best. So I'm very happy to be here at this great event. I thought the performance that began was great, and I'm very excited because, as I've told Stuart and Steve over the last year or two as we've been working on this, that they may be sick of hearing this, but they're both literary idols of mine, and for very specific reasons, which is not only, it's not a thing like, yes, I want to write like as well as they do, but they make me better readers when I read their work, and then more importantly, I feel like a better citizen of this world, and in Steve's case, some other world, and so either way, I feel good in that sense. The book, just a little history of it. I first encountered Steve's work when, what it feels like ages ago, but I would have been, I guess, 19 years old, and I just happened to have pulled Spiral Agitator down from a bookshelf and read it repeatedly, and over the years, subsequent years, came to learn that there was a long earlier history of Steve's work, and that he was still publishing, and then in Stuart's Surreal Estate anthology, I encountered Steve again, and then I just had multiple occasions to write about him, which was a great privilege. And so in around 2011, 2012, Steve and I began to think about this project, and slowly it kind of came into being, and Stuart gave us the great extra push, and we managed to get this book to come out this year as the first book in the A Feed Dog imprint that he has with Anvil, and I'm super excited about that. Steve is, as I read in the afterword, what I described as a cartographer of the imagination, and he is the person I go to when I need the comforts of altered states and other worlds, and I hope you read the book and derive that same pleasure that I get every time I encounter his work. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Is it great to have you here? It's great to be here. I think both. Yeah, that's it. It's fantastic to be here. I don't usually open with a dreary line like that, but the fact is, I've never meant anything more in my life. Okay, Suzanne, that was a beautiful introduction. Thank you, and Alex, that means so much to me. It's fantastic to have you here, up from Wilmington, North Carolina, where Dr. Porco teaches, and so I'll get the credits out of the way to begin with. Then Junction City Music Hall. This is a phenomenal venue. So thanks Julia and Zach for doing the tech, and Patricia back there. I don't know if I missed anyone. And at the risk of bringing too much solemnity to our festivities tonight, I want to read a poem about an historical event that did not end well. And you'll pardon me if I get a bit sentimental as I read it as well. I should caution you as well that there is some graphic content. There once was a man from Southampton who couldn't care less what he camped on. So he set up his tent on a strip of cement, and when rush hour came, he got stamped on. My son Carrie is right here, and that was probably my first limerick that I remember anyway, and I wish I could remember Carrie's because it was so much better. But I've got it written down somewhere. He was only about 5 at the time. I suppose I should read something, but I want to. And to have Fran and Trevor here too is tremendous. Thank you. Fran's EP as Mir, which Trevor's involved in as well, right? Is phenomenal. It's just beautiful. So you can get download cards here. You can find it online. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. Fran, I have been a fan of yours since I was like this and I always will be. Having Fran open for me and Stu it reminds me of the time that Judy Garland opened for E.E. Cummings and Rob McEwen. It's a great honor and I'm very grateful. But it is especially gratifying to be launching with my dear friend, colleague, and editor of 35 years, my brother Stuart Ross, and so this means a lot to me. It's been 10 years minus a day since I last launched, and that book was Floors of Enduring Beauty from Dennis DeClerc's Mansfield Press, and it was Dennis is here tonight, and it was Stuart's first book from his imprint at Mansfield. Well, I mean, Lillian's book was launched as well, so we were launching the same night, but it was the first launch for his imprint at Mansfield, and this is being the first launch almost exactly 10 years later of a feed dog book is thrilling and strange. And so I'm gonna take a page out of the Paul Dutton playbook and read something from a book that is not my selected during the launch of the selected, but we will get to that. And this ties in. I can make anything tie in pretty much if you've heard any of my other readings. Master of false segues. And reminds me of the time. Well, Stu, a feed dog is something on a sewing machine that feeds the fabric through. His grandfather, as you now know, was a tailor. And in Floors of Enduring Beauty, there is a piece that is to this Mr. Ross, and it's kind of prophetic because it mentions a dog, and the other thing. I don't know, what was I talking about? It's here somewhere. No, but yeah, it has the feed dog, and I should mention that. It's proud to be an Anvil Press author as well, Brian Kaufman's Press Anvil, of which Feed Dog is an imprint. And anyway, yeah, a dog and a tailor in this piece. I don't know what that was. Stuart Ross, Chief Groomer, Proper Tales Pet Salon. Dear Mr. Ross, the poems you ordered have at last arrived at our warehouse and will be shipped immediately pending your approval. We think you will find these pieces in the surrealistic genre to be well crafted and of a generally high caliber. Regrettably, however, one of the poems sustained some slight damage during transportation from our factory in Thetford to our warehouse in West Toronto. The poem in question is the one we ourselves had recommended in response to your interest in something anecdotal with a high verb count, not too dirty. The pastoral flavored Frickett's Curve, item number 10485. Only 2 short segments have been affected, and not necessarily, I might venture, for the worse. The phrase intended to read, amber-gloved clothesline pole erectors now reads taffy-colored birdbath inspectors. And the line ending hose down the tracks at railway stops now ends hoe down the racks at tailor shops. While we believe these flaws to have resulted from careless handling during transit, we're investigating the possibility that the employee who produced this piece failed to abide by our plant's strict specifications regarding the proper application of semantic fixative. As none of the other poems suffered similar alterations, we cannot rule out this theory. Having already kept you waiting longer than we should have liked, it will be our pleasure to ship these items free of charge the moment you give us the go-ahead. In addition, we will happily include an additional installment of the modular poem, The Turbulated Curtain. As we know from past orders, this title is among your favorites manufactured by our company. On behalf of all of us at TVI, please accept my apology for this incident and know that in the future we will do everything in our power to promptly meet your poetry needs. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we eagerly await your reply. Yours sincerely, Virgil Troop, Chief Executive Supervisor of Customer Service, Department of Poetry and Other Engineered Texts, Torpor Vigil Industries, Toronto, Ontario. Thank you. And so, speaking of the turbulated curtain, here's a segment or two of that poem, which has been, is now in its proper form, despite the poor handling. What hope is in a drop of rain gliding down a woman's sternum? What hope is in a snowflake melting on a dead man's tattooed ankle? Science and mathematics alone cannot answer these questions. They must be married to philosophy and religion before a true analysis is possible. There are those who think the only way to close a door is by sliding on their belly across the floor until enough pressure is effected that the door becomes no longer open. Others think the opposite. But is either notion correct? If you put a dog in heat, does it become a scorpion? That would be like tying two chickens together and calling it a bell. It's not rocket surgery. All you need is a strong belief in something other than common sense. For example, the golden age of steam engines, or how to repair a spoon drawer. Sometimes it seems there's just no proper way to end a discourse. But when you feel that way, remember. The bit about the sliding along the floor reminded me of something just now from my flight back from Wilmington, where Dr. Porco and the English department and the Office of International something were kind enough to have me down. Speaking of semantic fixative, I really need some now. Where the hell was I? But so on the way down to Wilmington to give a reading there, I had something curious happen, but I told that to them, so I'll tell you what happened on the way back here. I was seated next to a large friendly gent from Dallas, and fortunately he found someone across the aisle who was more into his subjects. I think football and Harleys, honestly, I think they're both really cool, but I don't know anything about either one. I just kind of wondered what he would think if he knew that he was sitting beside, for the whole flight, the author of The Tin of Fancy Excrements, A Journey of the Self. But we were talking as we came into Toronto. We saw the CN Tower, and this guy who you'd think was afraid of nothing, and there we've been flying over the clouds all this time, just as relaxed as could be, but he said he'd gone up the CN Tower, stepped out onto the glass floor, and before he knew it, he was crawling on his belly, and everybody was taking pictures of him. So there's a moral in that somewhere, and I'll leave it to you to figure out. And I will take just a moment to have a sip of water. I won't do it on the mic, but if I were that nice. could pull it off pretty well. He would make the most incredible sound. Or Christian, or any of the other great sound poets here tonight, Stuart Ross. But I did want to just say something. It's wonderful of Aldo to be live streaming things, and that is the camera there, Aldo?
Yeah, just a little thing.
Oh, yeah, it looks like an old something from the 70s. So I just want to, well, I guess I can't take this off. Well, I can, but I won't. Anyway, I'm just going to address the folks who are not here, because we really appreciate the rest of you. It's just it's kind of personal. I'll just be a minute. We really appreciate the fact that you're tuning in, and wherever you are, we'd love to be there in the future to do other events and be among you. And I think that the folks in the room here, they're probably, if I go on much longer, they might get anxious, and you might get bored anyway, because it's supposed to be a show or a poetry reading. So I'll read something. Now, a great longtime friend of mine is here tonight. A phenomenal composer, one of the most unique spirits I know. His name is James Blight. Jim, you could maybe put up your hand for a moment, or some part of your anatomy. And this is something Jim created. I'm in a phone booth. All around me are panthers, jet black and snarling. The panthers begin to change into Komodo dragons. The ones slow to metamorphose are being eaten by those already transformed. Lava pours down the slope of a nearby volcano. The sun will soon be eclipsed by ash. I don't have a quarter. Many years ago, in the middle of the night, I was very sick. As I slept, I dreamt that my stomach pains were being caused by an autoharp embedded in my abdomen. While the autoharp played a most ethereal rendition of Ode to Joy, an angelic voice sang in such soothing tones that I awoke crying at their duty. But the pain was still there, and now the lullaby was gone, and even though years have passed, I cannot listen to the strains of that melody without clutching my stomach in agony. So it seems to me that pain can sometimes make us dream of beauty, but that beauty always awakens us to our pain. It was pretty good. He wrote that little ditty himself, I think, didn't he, Jim? Suzanne, you're going to maybe let me know how I am for time, because I've just been rambling on. Do you think we're okay? Okay, because there's another, I'm going to do a little, I don't know if this has been done before, but it's poetry karaoke. Because Jim did some other work, and I might let a little bit of that run, because it's so wonderful too. This is a while back, and it's about to start. I can tell. I have a strong sense. There it is.
The arctic stuff of a marine cephalopod with dark, glossy, iridescent tropical fruit or entrails.
cake made of something startling and unreal. It's an interpretive dance for you. An erotic state. An erotic state marked by sticky and hairy long-distance radio transmissions.
And if I'm not mistaken, there's one other.
The fleshy part attached to the rear edge of an airplane's wing.
The fleshy part attached to the rear edge of an airplane's wing. The fleshy part attached to the rear edge of an airplane's wing. The fleshy part attached to the rear edge of an airplane's wing. The sound works by James Blight, my dear friend. Thanks. I'd like to have Stuart and Alex come up for a moment if they would. I was going to give this to you earlier, but we never had the opportunity. It's been a real whirlwind. Oh, good, they're both still here. For a second. By the way, these marvelous little tote bags are available from the Tor Provincial Arts site at Society 6. There was a place called the Black Domain, and I hadn't been there in 10 years, I think, since the last launch. But what I didn't tell my friends here, and I'm sure they'll be very interested to know, is that I have been back once since, and I managed to bring something from that dimension back to this for the first time ever. And so, two pieces. One belongs to Stuart Ross, and the other to Alessandro Porco. And this specimen of unknown obsidian is one of two brought back from the Black Domain on 30 October 2017. A gift to Alessandro Porco and Stuart Ross, who never doubted me. This is highly unprofessional of me for a poet to be. So, you know, I've hosted many readings, and I tell people we didn't have 12-minute limit this time, but 12 minutes, folks, and they just will go on and on no matter what. And you have to yank them off. Suzanne, is there one more short piece? Or I think are we okay? Okay, thanks for your putting up with me. I mean, I know this is a real atmosphere of love. So I didn't mean to sound like disingenuous or anything, but I will nevertheless put you through a little more. And just a little more. There's some new parts to a piece called Manta Ray Jack and the Crew of the Spooner, which is the adventures of a kind of thank you, a sort of bumbling sea captain and his crew. They stop at a lighthouse and ascend either to take a leak, which seems improbable because you wouldn't think you'd dock your ship, go all the way to the top of the lighthouse. You'd have something else happening there, but they were thirsty anyway, and whatever the case, they ended up here, and the lighthouse keeper was out, but he makes his return, and this ties us back to the beginning, because this is also a Mr. Ross, a relative of Stuart's, Mr. Albert Ross. Okay, this is good because I can blame that on Opal Nations. I haven't met Opal, but he's a friend of Stu's, and I think Stuart had forgotten this, but he once addressed an envelope to Stuart, Mr. Stuart Albert Ross. Don't tell him I said that, okay? Just then, the keeper of the tower, a Mr. Albert Ross, flew in, soaked from the fetid weather and looking much like a tattered bird with wetted feather. He was back from the abode of his cousin Drew, who was billeting a dozen crew from a ship that had, soon after it was boarded, sunk, and with whom our lighthouse codger, as kitehouse lodger, was forced to share a sordid bunk, in company with a creaky old loser they'd found waving a gun around at Crapper's Tavern shortly after their leaky old cruiser had run aground at Trapper's Cavern. It was to that same tavern that Mr. Ross had repaired after one last kite nap for one last nightcap before heading home to his luminous spire. But a single nightcap is such a scrawny bore, and before long the one had become a brawny score. The Crapper's bartender, a spuminous liar, but a frisky wench, poured out her hearts to him, she claimed to have been born with a pair, along with glass after glass of whiskey, French. Inspired by the Abyssinian barman's ruminating lies, for example, having once made porn with a bear, as well as the illuminating rise, which she mixed with salt water and called sailor tea, he took a perky quill and some sort of quirky pill, then made like Samuel Taylor C., a man whose poetic notions, induced by noetic potions, were realized by scribbling while dreaming. But barely had his scribbling and dreaming begun when it was interrupted by the untimely intrusion of a wandering Porlock wimp, whose sudden and startling appearance, he was dressed rather in the style of a warlock pimp, set the old lighthouse keeper to dribbling and screaming. This boisterous oozing drew the attention of two daring shrinks who'd been sharing drinks and now invited him to join their oysterous boozing. The duo had attained a degree of fame while shucking, though their true expertise was in treating individuals who experienced shame while fornicating. By the time our Mr. Ross, eyes glazed as a dead hawk's, took his leave of the two head docks, the battered shells of clamorous oysters lay all about him, like the shattered bells of amorous cloisters. Now back atop his familiar perch, with a belly full of oysterous regret, he burst through the lighthouse door like a roisterous egret. This has been fantastic for me. It's been a wonderful time. Thanks. Have some fun.